Thank you for joining us today as the President escalates tensions with California, with the National Guard being deployed and Marines on standby. Today we have a special guest, Felicia Escobar-Carrillo. She is the former Chief of Staff of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services during the Biden administration. She was also Senior Policy Director at the Domestic Policy Council and a Special Assistant to the President for Immigration Policy during the Obama administration. Felicia, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to be here with you all.
Let's just get started with the basic. Was deploying the National Guard in Los Angeles really necessary? And is it really necessary to have 500 Marines sitting there at 29 Palms waiting to be called in?
In a word, no. I don't think this was necessary. I mean, Los Angeles is the second largest city in the country. It's a place where peaceful protests, demonstration, and marches happen on a regular basis on all kinds of issues. Local leaders, law enforcement, they really know how to effectively manage and maintain public safety during these large-scale events. And so, you know, from my perspective, it was not necessary. The city was managing the situation, you know, as the governor, made clear, Governor Newsom made clear, they did not request this. And I think some folks have been flagging the last time something like this happened, where a president took the extraordinary action of calling up National Guard troops without the request of a state's governor. We have to go back all the way to 1965 when LBJ sent troops to help protect civil rights demonstrators in Alabama. So rather than quell peaceful protests. So I don't think it was necessary. If anything, it only inflamed the tensions already in the community and sowed chaos, not actually keep communities safe. So, obviously our U.S. military plays a very important role in keeping our country safe from foreign adversaries, and not necessarily, this is not their job to enforce, a president's political agenda and punish communities that are trying to protect their neighbors, their friends, hardworking individuals who are just trying to live day by day and support their families and contribute to the economy. So in my mind, it wasn't necessary.
I liked West Wing, and there was an episode, Posse Comitatus, which I guess is the military is not allowed to turn their weapons on Americans. Can we invoke that? Like, where's the legality in what they're doing?
Well, there are some laws on the books where you are able to use troops in communities, but it's a very rare occurrence, and it needs to be, basically to quell a rebellion and an insurrection. That's not what we have here. We have communities raising their concerns about policies that are in place that are making their communities less safe, that are endangering their friends and their neighbors, that are breaking families apart. This isn't a civil war. I hope we don't get to that point. And so it doesn't feel like this is the time or the place to invoke that very extreme measure.
I don't even think Trump likes California. Los Angeles is the entertainment elite. San Francisco is Pelosi land. I don't think. And so I guess my question is, Newsom is really going after Trump. And that has some risk, because Trump is not shy about punishing those who go after him. So I'm wondering, with Newsom being so extreme, what risk does this have for California and for the governor's office?
Well, I mean, I don't think the tactics for dealing with the president and the administration, whether you're trying to find a way to work with them or you're not, I don't really feel like you can ever win in the situation. So I think Newsom is doing, is trying to look out for the community and look out for the people that he represents in California. And people are raising concerns about this situation. If the administration really wanted to work with Newsom, and Newsom, I think is he's reasonable. He's willing to work with administrations. If he really wanted to work with them, they would have reached out and talked about the situation, asked him for a briefing, found out what's really going on the ground, figure out how to work in partnership to ensure that we can keep the peace. That's not what they did here. And I think, there is such outrage in California right now with what's going on that I think Newsom had to be responsive to his voters. I mean, that's my take.
We've had some sort of federal support, some sort of DoD support on the border since 2006, pretty much consistently. So there has been National Guard support for Border Patrol, for example, but that's always been in a support. I don't want to say administrative capacity, but sort of technical. They're not there to do law enforcement work. They're there to help Border Patrol with, for example, they'll watch the cameras. They'll monitor the feeds that are coming in from cameras and do other support to free up the workforce that actually does have the authorities to go help. And in terms of the deployment, the irony of this, where that the Trump administration is just using this to inflame, and it actually doesn't do what they're stating they want. If the National Guard was actually deployed by the governor, it would be able to help with law enforcement type of duties, because it's been taken over by the federal government, by the president, and the chain of command now goes straight to the commander in chief. Now the posse comitatus issue comes into play, where they cannot actually do law enforcement work, is my understanding. That again shows the hypocrisy, because you claim that you're trying to do something for the law enforcement purpose of it, but the reality is that by federalizing the National Guard, you're actually now making that restricted within the law. And so, Felicia, I think it's important also to go back onto why LA, why immigration, why this flashpoint, and why is the president trying to provoke this confrontation right now?
Sure. I mean, things have been escalating for months, right, in communities around the country. I think the administration set a goal of, arresting about 1,000 folks a day, immigrants a day, towards the beginning of the administration. Just in the last few weeks, as we understand it, Secretary Noem and the White House, Stephen Miller, purportedly demanded that ICE arrest 3,000 people a day, and they, told folks, to push the envelope, to be creative, to go to Home Depots, to go anywhere and everywhere to pick folks up. And so this is not just happening in LA. I think that's something that's important to say. Every day, every week, it seems like another community is getting targeted wherever, all across the country, whether you're in Florida and Texas and Massachusetts, New York, Illinois, or California. So it's certainly happening everywhere. But this past Friday, there was an action taken in Los Angeles in three locations, as I understand it. And then that really is where it really kind of inflamed and took hold in communities in Los Angeles, that they were actually going up and picking up people and seeking to arrest people. As I understand it, they've arrested about 40 to 50 people and are holding them in the downtown Los Angeles ICE detention facility. And I think, people responded because they were concerned about what was happening in their communities with their friends and neighbors, the folks that they work with every day, the folks that have their kids go to school with their kids. And so the protests and marches started. They were, as I understand it, pretty peaceful. There were certainly some folks that might have been engaging in less than peaceful demonstrations, and the governor and local authorities have made clear that they're going to look at footage. They're going to go after the folks that have done set fire to things like that. But by and large, everything was happening in a peaceful way, as I understand it. And so I think LA is a place that is a target, a place that that the administration wanted to go after. California and LA communities that are not taking kindly to the administration's enforcement priorities are going to be a target. I think LA is just the latest, unfortunately, that's getting a target on its back with the law enforcement action that took place starting on Friday.
I'm really proud of the Angelenos, because this is what matters. This is something that's worth protesting for. I mean, Los Angeles has always been, they protest over everything, whether it's foie gras or Britney Spears' health. And so sometimes you roll your eyes, but this is what matters. This is really important. I'm glad they're protesting this and not some ridiculous cause.
Yeah, but I would say, just to butt in here, it was definitely not about necessity. I mean, it was clear that, the governor was handling this, but that didn't fit in with the narrative that Trump is pushing. Immigration for him has been a political winner. A lot of people think that he won the election because of that. And he wanted to, or he enthusiastically sort of moved forward with deploying the Guard in California without the governor's consent. And federalizing the Guard was meant to create a confrontation. And yes, on the issue, there was some violence, and I think there is vandalism. And I think, as you're saying, Felicia, I think things are likely to escalate. But authorities had been restoring the order, but Trump, was forcing an escalation because, he really didn't want to talk anymore about Elon Musk and the problems that he was having with Musk. He didn't want to talk about the opposition that is starting to grow even more now with the big, beautiful bill. So, he wants to go back to this law and order issue, the drama, dominate the headlines. And the question is whether LA needed the Guard. It's completely unnecessary, but did Trump need to change the subject? I think that was very clear. And then I think there were some other things that you said that are really important on the Insurrection Act. Trump has started talking and referring to the protesters as rebellion, as an insurrectionists. Trump is now pushing and threatening in that direction. And I think if he's able to prove that or demonstrate that, he has the intention of unlocking extraordinary powers. And I think that he will need court approval to do that. He can't simply just issue a proclamation declaring that this is insurrection. But I think the idea is to federalize the National Guard, to deploy active duty U.S. troops. And as Jeremy was saying earlier, the whole habeas posse comitatus act, which normally bars military policing, he wants to have the freedom to maneuver. It's not like what's happening in California is sort of the full package. I think he's building on this to use his power and his authority nationally. And that really opens up some really problematic scenarios. Immigration, I think he wants to use that in order to bolster his authority and, be able to move freely around the country. And that's a big concern.
And that's a really good point, because it means that there other governors, even Republican ones, who think that this is just something that's going to affect blue states. Yeah. Watch out. We saw this with FEMA, where the funding that usually goes out to states when there's an emergency, when there's natural disaster. This administration has been basically breaking FEMA apart and took the extraordinary step of denying help to Arkansas, a very red state, after a tornado, something that should, have Republican governors just as worried as Democratic governors of what exactly this administration is going to do. And I think, Carl, you're exactly right that this is a big distraction. You had a week in which Elon Musk was very much sparring with Donald Trump, reminding the American public that Donald Trump may well be in the Epstein files, or at least according to Elon, he is. And they wanted to distract from that, but also this escalation on the immigration front. I think it's worth breaking that apart a little bit, because the use of National Guard alone is not the problem. The problem starts with forcing immigration authorities to be more aggressive than they need to be. ICE, it's been reported, was trying to focus on criminals. And it's important for people to know that, because a lot of the tension and the community anger is directed at ICE. ICE was trying to focus on criminals, and Stephen Miller told them, no, go after everybody. Mm-hmm. And then they took the rest of DHS and took them off of the things that they need to be doing, like human trafficking, like investigating cartels, like preventing terrorism, and they have them focused on interior immigration enforcement. And then they took people from the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and others to help with this and to really escalate tensions in a way that also puts those federal law enforcement officers in a bad situation. Look, ironically, the tear gas might look terrible, but part of what you're seeing is that federal law enforcement is trying to de-escalate the situation without violence. And the problem is when you mix in, National Guard and you mix in Marines, you just don't know what the situation is. We had this during our administration where the state of Texas sent their National Guard folks out to the river, and you had an incident where one of the Guard members drowned in the river trying to rescue someone. Because again, they're not supposed to be there. They're not supposed to be there doing what they're put in a position to do, and so it creates chaos and makes the whole situation worse. And it's going to take years to repair the relationships between DHS, which is an entity that is supposed to work locally with communities. Like, the whole point of DHS is to be a department of partnerships that's working with communities to help keep them safe, to get them information, to make sure that they're anticipating threats, that they're helping communicate information up. When you create this kind of adversarial relationship with local law enforcement and with communities, Nate Schneider said this on the show last week, you make communities less safe.
Yeah. I think the elephant in the room, pardon the pun, Trump, he has trigger finger. He wants us. He's always wanted to use the military. He's having a military parade. During the first administration, people said he was fascinated by nuclear bombs. And I think, this is from the top. He wants to use the military. This is playing into everything he wants.
Absolutely.
But the issue also is he can't just declare an insurrection. I mean, he has to establish that law enforcement can't enforce the law. And in California, the law the law enforcement had this under control, is what they're saying. There's no clear legal standard which makes the abuse possible, right? But once it's invoked, the powers include, federalizing the National Guard and sending active duty troops in. And they have a lot of latitude. I mean, and we're talking about, it was last used during the civil rights era in order to integrate schools. Little Rock, 1957, right? LA riots, where the governor requested this kind of help. So now if this tactic works in California, expect copycat moves in blue states. And this, as a sort of thematic challenge, is a profound threat to federalism and democracy. And if you believe in the rule of law and in due process and all the things that I think define us as Americans and that supposed American exceptionalism, those things are all up for grabs. So, what I'm hoping for is that there be a swift response by the opposition. That could be, obviously I'm looking at Democrats, but I'm also looking at the Republicans who have started pushing back, even though they're few, have started pushing back, that they come together and they start responding to this, because, there's more here on the line that goes directly to who we are as a country. I hope we see a response.
Yeah. And I'll just add that, to your point, Carl, like, this is written in the, if you go and you look at the order that the president signed, the memo he sent to the Attorney General, or the memo was sent to the Attorney General, the Department of Defense and DHS. It's not about just California. It's not about just Los Angeles. It is invoking the use of the National Guard writ large. So they're not going to have to do another one of these. They're just going to act the next time they want to in whatever state or community they want to go to next, because of people's, peacefully demonstrating and exercising their freedom of speech rights to raise concerns about policies. And the last go around, that he wanted to use the Guard and he wanted to use violence against folks because of other things happening, and people at DOD stopped him. But, this go around, he's not having, that's not happening, and he's moving forward. So
there's no Mark Milley. There's no Mark Milley to save us. But again, he has a bunch of sycophants running the Defense Department, which is really scary.
And even short of the Department of Defense, again, when you look at what happened in Portland during the George Floyd protests, it was the tension was with DHS and other federal agents who were being put in bad and difficult situations, again, similar to what we're seeing now. And look, I think Portland is still struggling to recover from what happened back then. I also think it's important to reiterate that the vast majority of the protesters were peaceful and have been peaceful, but there are agitators. And so, at Center, our whole goal is, to also criticize both sides where we see things that are wrong. And let's just say it right here, like throwing rocks at the federal agents, burning property, defacing buildings, all of that kind of stuff is only going to work to help Donald Trump, not go against it. So again, I think the bulk of the protests have been peaceful, and that's exactly what we should be doing as Americans, is to peacefully protest. But when they turn violent, when they attack federal agents, and look, frankly, when they wave Mexican flags, I've seen a lot of defense of the waving of the Mexican flag on social media today. And look, save it for the soccer match. When you make it easier for Donald Trump to argue the things he wants to argue, when you're out on the streets of America waving a foreign country's flag on U.S. soil as cars are burning, like that image doesn't help anybody. And so I think it is important to reiterate, most of the protests have been peaceful. Those images are there, but that doesn't define all of the protesters. But it just doesn't help. It just helps only Donald Trump.
I agree.
I think we should get away from that.
And we were talking about this earlier, that and maybe this is taboo for some folks, but violent protests in LA over immigration are in a different political register, right? The cultural rage behind January 6th and the Capitol insurrection, right? You have these kind of two very sort of controversial moments in our history, right? And in both cases, people turn to violence in response to a perceived loss, right? Whether national identity or dignity of protection for vulnerable migrants, right? But such violence is just wrong and self-defeating when it comes to advocating for these different views. The risk is now escalating that the unrest around immigration is going to fuel broader national clashes and further divide our country right now. And the only person that this really helps is Donald Trump, because it's going to give a justification for the use of the kind of authority that we believe is, I think, without the Constitution, without a legal process to demonstrate that it's necessary, without listening to governors, when governors tell you they don't want you to come in because they have it under wraps, you're really just, it's the executive branch sort of run amok.
Yeah. And DHS has an Office of Inspector General. These departments, ICE and CBP, they have a Office of Professional Responsibility that investigates misconduct, but those are being gutted. The IGs are being removed by Trump. I don't know how much the Office of Professional Responsibility is even able to do. And so they're also encouraging conduct that heightens those tensions. There was a video that Telemundo was posted just a couple of days ago that showed two kids left behind in their car after their dad was forcibly removed, I believe, when he was dropping them off at an elementary school. Those kids are traumatized. You have, windows getting bashed in as other people get dragged out while they're on the phone with their attorneys. So I think, there's also the conduct that these departments have standards. They have professional responsibility that they adhere to. The vast majority of these workforces take a lot of pride in doing right by their job and by the mission. And I think that to encourage the type of conduct that puts that into question is also terrible for the agency and the department as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Carl, I agree with you on this totally. And I remember, Democrats always create images that help Republicans. And I remember in Pride Fest one year in New York City, there was, LGBTQ protesters, and one of them had a big sign said, "We're coming to get your children." And I was just like, no, that's not the message. We always do their job for them.
Love is a much better message.
But Luis, you were talking about Mexican flags before. And, unfortunately, because, again, we had this conversation before, guys, where, you mentioned the Mexican flags that are in the protests. But in New York, I'm from New York, and so is Jeremy. In New York, you have Italian flags, you have Irish flags. And everybody puts that sort of in the, it's my background kind of bucket, right? The moment you have people protesting with Mexican flags, it's because they're disloyal. It's because they're not from here. They're from somewhere else. Unfortunately, that's sort of that's the symbol that's being pushed. Unfortunately, even though the same folks that are waving their Mexican flags are American citizens, and they're pretty much saying this is part of who I am. Part of being American includes this. And
look, and I'll wave an Irish flag on St. Patrick's Day and a Puerto Rican one on the Puerto Rican Pride Parade and you name it. But I think it's important to differentiate those cultural moments from a moment where you are protesting against the state.
Right.
And that to me is where you have to be careful to draw that line and separate out the culture from something that is easily manipulated by the other side. I think that's wholly problematic. And Felicia, I know that you worked at DHS for a long time too, so curious about your perspectives on the workforce.
Yeah, I mean, there are good people, men and women at DHS that are trying every day to help implement the mission of the department. It's a big, vast department, 225,000 plus. I was at USCIS. Our job was to process immigration applications for people who were seeking benefits. Luis, you were talking about different people getting diverted from their mission to engage in this enforcement, these enforcement efforts that are underway. USCIS has thousands of people that have been called on to do immigration enforcement rather than help people who have paid dollars to get their applications processed within a timely place. Folks that are playing by the rules, following the law, and trying to actually get their benefits processed. Those folks are being diverted to do some of this, immigration dragnet type activities rather than actually, our agency is a fee-based agency. 97% of what we do, it's not money from Congress, it's money from people, everyday people who are paying to help get their green card, get citizenship, employers who are trying to recruit workers. It's about people paying money for service, and they're not able to do that work right now. So, I've definitely, when I was at the agency and worked across, the department, there were so many people that were really dedicated to doing the work. They're being, the agency and the department are being gutted, and the folks, and some people are getting removed from doing the work that they were doing before. And it's really unfortunate because it doesn't need to be politicized. Homeland security, public safety, helping people in disasters, that should be work that everyone can get behind.
So what do you do when the president doesn't respect the law? I mean, one of the crazy things I heard was when he wanted to fire the head of the Library of Congress. I'm like, Congress. Like, this guy has no, and judges are saying don't send immigrants back, and they just pretend they didn't hear it. What do you do when the administration just doesn't follow the law?
Well, I think the protests are warranted, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think also lifting up, the stories of what's happening, like, who's actually getting picked up and removed. Like you mentioned, kids getting dropped up by their parents, and then their parents get picked up, ICE is there waiting to pick them up. People going to the courts to actually do the thing that they're being required to do, which is do the due process and go before the courts, and getting picked up right there, then and there. I've heard people mention that there are like raids at elementary school graduations, folks working every day in the fields or at restaurants, and people are getting rounded up. And, I think that we have to talk about that. We have to talk about the fact that a lot of these people are folks that have been here for years, if not decades, who have been trying to play by the rules. We have not given them a way to get right with the law, and we need to do that. But in the meantime, they're trying to abide by the law, and those are the kinds of stories that I think people are responsive to, and you see. Poll after poll, like, people want a balanced approach. They want enforcement. They know enforcement is important. They know you have to, try to get bad guys out of communities, right? But they also know that a lot of immigrants are here to do the work that maybe they don't want to do 9 times out of 10, and that we should be finding a way to help those folks get on a path to regularize their status. So, I think talking about the stories of things happening in communities to real people, and also talking about a balanced approach. This is not a balanced approach. This is overreach, and we need to call it out, and we need to be trying to ask for and call for balanced solutions.
Well, I think one of the other problems is, we don't have a Fox News that can just put our video on a loop. And unfortunately, the news organizations that are, I'm not going to say they're liberal, but they're more balanced, they're legitimate news organizations. So we can't trust them to play the same images over and over. Fox News is a propaganda machine. And any video that helps them, it's going to be on a loop. Our side, unfortunately, does the reporting and fact checking, which I know is, very antiquated.
Yeah, we can do a whole episode on the media failures with this issue. I mean, during the Biden administration, they were out there every day on the border to capture any image, and now they all left the border because it's not a sexy story anymore. And this administration hasn't even published numbers, so we don't actually know how many people are crossing the border right now.
The image that you've explained, Jeremy, is really important because most of what we're getting from, like, on your whatever, on your feed, you get a lot. If you're interested in this issue, you will get more information, right? They'll show you images of parents being unstuck from their children, showing up at their, immigrant interviews that they have to do, and that's where they get them. They show you everything, but when you go on the news, if you watch CNN, for instance, they're not really playing that up. They're not explaining that, right? So, and Fox is actually doing, their side of the whole thing, which is, again, you're not getting any objective anything. The issue is Americans do have an issue with crime. I think that's a normal one. But Americans don't like and don't want family separation. This is an issue that should be sort of the focal argument here. There are moms who are picking up their children or go on their way to pick up their children. They go to their interview and they can't get back to school. They cannot get back to school to pick up their kids. And the story here that I think is very important is, instead of, for a lot of Americans, you can put this whole suffering aside because it's the other. It's people that I don't know. It's people that I don't hang out with. I go to a restaurant. Maybe I see some Latino folks there and I'm very polite. No, we're talking about people just like you, just like anybody who has the same relationship with the school, with the, with going to the hospital, all of the things, the human experience, right? And these are the same people as you that are being thrust out of that experience. And I feel that the side that's not being out there is the side that everybody shares, the commonality that we all share. And why did you come here in the first place? I came here because I wanted a better life for my family. And I'm trying to play by the rules. And the people that are trying to play by the rules and go to their interviews are the people that are sort of the low-hanging fruit, and they're grabbing them and they're throwing them out. That story has to be talked about. And, this whole issue of immigration reform and where we are right now, it's the blame of both parties. How many years were we talking about immigration reform? And then you had McCain with immigration reform. And then you had, I remember, because I worked in the Congress in the early 2000s, right? Then you had Daschle. Daschle was pushing it. Then you had Kennedy, and I had all kinds of good friends on both sides of the aisle there that were pushing and pushing and pushing, but nothing ever came about. So we're stuck.
I don't think they wanted it to come about. I mean, I think it was the dirty secret Congress. Republicans wanted cheap labor and Democrats wanted votes. And so that nothing ever went through. And Trump is the first person to blow stuff up, unfortunately, in the wrong way.
Just to reiterate, this administration is doing things dirty because what they're doing is they're telling the courts, the immigration judges, just dismiss the cases. So when people show up for their hearings, we'll just pick them up and arrest them right outside. So they're actually hurting compliance because people are now scared to show up for their proceedings. And they're even going after legal people who came here legally, more than 500,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans who waited, got screened and vetted, didn't come here in any way legally until they had an authorization to buy their own plane ticket and fly here like everyone else who waits for a visa or some sort of status. They waited for that. and now they're being treated like they came here illegally. So, just to close on that, and Felicia, to give you the final word here on, you've been at the heart of trying to get something done.
Yeah, I mean, I think there have been good people on both sides of the aisle who have wanted to get it done every single time we've tried. It's easy to say, like, after the fact, oh, it was just politics, Dems did this, Republicans wanted that. Every time we wanted to get it done. The reality is that passing anything that big is really hard to do, right? And it only happens every 20 or 30 years where Congress can really pass big laws. I mean, and increasingly they're not capable of it unless they're kind of, their backs are to the mat, right? As someone who also worked in Congress, right? So I think every time the politics just haven't been on our side. In 2006 and 2007, we had, we thought we could get a better bill in 2007. We thought we could get a bit, we had Bush with us in 2013. We got a bill. We had a lot of momentum. And then, some Republican primaries happened that spooked everyone, right? Like, so every time there's something that happens, unfortunately, that stops us from getting it done. So I think that we definitely tried, and, we got to try again. And it may not be the big bill that people might have wanted at some point, but we have to show some action, and we have to show some leadership, and we have to have real ideas that we put forward that hopefully can garner support. So I'm totally with you on that. I will say that I think that every time, because I was very closely involved in the conversations, people were trying to get it done. And it's more than just a few folks, though. And politics are so big, as we all know. And you can't control everything, whether you're a Republican or a Democratic president. So hopefully that helps us now in that, people are really standing up for their beliefs and their convictions. They're doing it peacefully. They're doing it lawfully. And we can turn the tide on this issue by sharing the real stories of the people who are hurting, which is, it's more than just the immigrants. It's the churches, it's the businesses, it's the schools, it's the teachers, it's their classmates. It's so many more people than just the immigrants themselves that are hurting. And we just have to lift that up so that everyone recognizes, oh, wow, this is bad. This is not the way, this is not what this is not what I asked for. I wanted enforcement, but this is not what I asked for. We got to lift those voices up.
Yeah, and to Jeremy's point, the economic need is at the heart of this. So to pretend that this is just about the migrants, no, it's about is our labor and economic needs. And you're saying, Felicia, that people didn't vote for this. I know that the woman who founded Latinas for Trump in Miami has claimed that she didn't vote for this, but Trump promised us he was going to do this. Like, you obviously were not paying attention if you didn't realize that this was, because this is exactly what they promised. And now hopefully this helps us have a broader conversation as we move forward. So thank you for joining us on such short notice. Felicia, thank you, Jeremy and Carl, as always.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening and subscribing to Centered.